One of the breakthrough features of the Boss SY-1000 is access to the individual string inputs and outputs in the USB audio stream. With this feature, you can record a guitar performance into your DAW, then freely experiment using different SY-1000 patches on the recorded track. Boss calls this resynthesis. This is similar to the process of reamping, where a guitar signal is recorded dry and then played back, or reamped through different amplifiers. But resynthesis takes this to a whole new level, since you can not only change the amplifier, but the kind of guitar used on a track, like switching between a Strat or Les Paul or Acoustic, or even using, say, a Roland GR-300 Guitar Synthesizer. With each string recorded individually, there was also a whole new level of editing and creativity as well. You can literally correct the performance of one note on one string without having to punch in on the entire track. So I'm going to take you through how to get set up with doing resynthesis. Now in this case, I'm of course using the Boss SY-1000, and I'm using Digital Performer as my digital audio workstation. So I've checked that I'm in tune here on my Boss Tone Studio. So here are the steps that I recommend you follow to get set up with resynthesis. First thing, install the Boss SY-1000 Tone Studio. I find it super helpful working with the SY-1000 because I find the user interface on the synthesizer a little less than satisfactory. But more importantly, if you've got the SY-1000 up and running and working as it should on your computer, then you don't need to worry about, do I have the latest drivers installed? Is there an issue with installing the software? If you've got the SY-1000 working okay, you should be good in that regard. Next thing you need to do is you need to configure whatever you're going to be using to work with your SY-1000. So I'm using Digital Performer. So let's go look under Digital Performer, and I'm going to go to the hardware driver. Now, I don't know if this is an issue with other packages like, Logic or Ableton or whatever, but I find that Digital Performer is very finicky when I'm not using the Mode 2 hardware. So almost every time I fire Digital Performer up, I need to at least check these settings because it may not be remembered. But under my hardware, you can see I have the SY-1000 selected. The master device is the SY-1000. We're using the SY-1000 for the clock mode, and I have the sample rate set to 48K because that is the sample rate in the SY-1000. So we're good to go there. Next thing I need to do is set up the tracks that I'm going to be recording on. Now the SY-1000 audio stream actually has 8 signals. So the first pair, the outputs 1 and 2, or inputs 1 and 2, that's the main output from the SY-1000. It's like the stereo output. Then we have outputs 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And you can see how these line up. So for output 3, I have a note here, it's track E6, so that for me is the high E. And then I have B goes with output 4, G with 5, D all the way down to where the last output is E1, the lowest E on the guitar. If we go to the meter bridge, we can see this Mode 2 software showing me the inputs and the outputs. So for my input, so we can see all of our inputs and outputs set up there. Now there is a little hardware setup that we have to do back over on the SY-1000. So let's pop back to the Tone Studio. In a case like this where we're going to be getting signals from the SY-1000 and then playing them back through the SY-1000, you need to select a resynthesis mode. So let's go over here under System, and we go to the USB setting. And under audio routing, I have resynthesis selected. Now, there are 2 modes for resynthesis. If we pop back to the owner's manual here, this is the, not the owner's manual, it's the reference manual. You'll see that there are 4 or 5 different modes of USB audio. There's standard, mix, Resynth 1, Resynth 2, and then we have direct off. Now, in all of these different routings, you'll notice that the GK setting goes to the PC input 1 through 6, regardless of what everything else is. So this means that those additional 6 outputs representing each string, those are on all the time. You don't have to do anything special to get those into the computer. So really, this is about how are we going to handle the other routing to and from the computer. So for resynthesis, what we're doing right now, we have resynthesis 1 or resynthesis 2. The big difference is how do we handle that main output from the computer. In this case, the output's going to represent a backing track that I have, and then the individual string signals. Now with Resynthesis 2, the output from the PC goes through, you select either the main mix level or the submix level. So that's basically an output from PC to main mix or submix. When you're using Resynthesis 1, you can actually take that PC signal that's coming back from the computer and bring it into the effects chain. And I just don't want to mess with that. I'm only just looking at getting the sound from the computer. I don't want to be adding any additional effects. So perhaps there might be an application where you'd want to do that. We can see that in Resynthesis 1 and Resynthesis 2, the individual string outputs, GK 1 through 6, they go to an instrument input, and the normal pickup signal has been disabled. So this is where the magic happens. You're taking those 6 outputs that you've recorded as individual tracks and then playing them back into the SY-1000. So again, I have this mine set up to be Resynthesis 2. And if we go back to the SY-1000, we can see over here under USB setting, I've just got main out, main in for my in and out. It's the most simple, most direct for the main in and out. And then for the audio routing, I've got Resynthesis 2 selected. So let's hit close and let's pop back to Digital Performer real quick, and we'll do a little recording. So I'm going to go over here to Tracks. So the sound that I'm using right now is a little acoustic sound that I put together. And the reason I'm recording with the acoustic sound is it makes me much more cognizant of my playing. Any flaws, any mistakes I make, they're much more transparent when you're using an acoustic patch. I think this track is really, we're going to want to use it kind of an overdriven, distorted sound, and you'll see why here in a second. But just for the purposes of tracking, I like the idea that I can track it with the acoustic where I'm really aware of any flaws in my performance, and you will be aware of those flaws too, I can tell you. But then when we play back, we can experiment with different sounds. And particularly, I like this a lot for the SY-1000 because I'm just not at all blown away by any of the factory patches. And it's kind of a soul-killing experience to pick up my guitar and go through some of these patches, and I just go, what on earth is there here for me to use? So by recording the tracks individually in my digital audio workstation and then playing them back, I can sort of separate programmer, sound designer person from guitar player person. I can play the track like I want to, and then the track will continue to play while I can then manipulate parameters, listen for patches, make edits, make changes to get something that I'm a little bit more satisfied with. Okay, so let's play that back. Okay, so we've got our tracks recorded here. You can see each string is on its own track. I didn't even play the B and the high B and the high E, so of course those tracks are blank. Now, the cool thing is we can now try out some different, perhaps more appropriate sounds for this track. I'm going to pop over to the Tone Studio while Digital Performer is playing. Here's a Strat. Synthesizer. Bluesy 335. Oh yeah. So there you go. That's resynthesis. That's what it's all about. We've recorded the track, we've recorded the components, each individual string, but we can completely change around what kind of guitar we're using. And that is a factory patch. But we can do more than just resynthesis. I have another video that talks about guitar synthesis outside of the SY-1000, but since we're set up here in Digital Performer with the in the digital audio workstation environment, we can put plugins on each one of these individual tracks that we've recorded. In fact, we don't even need to use the SY-1000 to do cool guitar synthesis. We can just use it as an interface. So I have another chunk set up in Digital Performer called Direct Guitar Mark Smart, and let's enable that chunk. So it's called Mark Smart because I'm using a little cool guitar synthesizer plugin that Mark Smart built, designed, and posted to the Native Instruments Reactor forum, and this was ages ago. So let's and what I've done is I've set up 6 tracks. If we go to the mixer window, mixing board over here, I've set up 6 tracks, and I've got each individual output like before going to each one of these tracks, but I'm actually not recording anything now. I'm just listening to it. So let's go back to the mixing board and let me play a little bit on the guitar. So this is guitar synthesis done entirely outside of the SY-1000 using plugins, Reactor native instrument plugins inside of Digital Performer. Let's see. So let's go and look at just this one string. Now, I threw this together real quick. There are much better ways to do this. Each string has its own individual guitar synthesizer on it. It probably would be better to sort of combine these, which means I can have completely different guitar synthesizer settings on each individual string. And this is a pretty great software recreation of the GR-300. I would just point out, there's a section here that's called Moving Bandpass, and this is about that filter that makes the GR-300 work so well. When so this is the B string. If we look over here under the control voltage, it's just sitting there. But if I play above the 7th fret, we can see that the filter changes positions. And what's cool about that is the filtering is really critical for guitar synthesis, to make sure that you're filtering out the frequencies that are going to confuse the tracking, but adjust those frequencies depending on where you play on the guitar, so the filtering is always appropriate for whatever you're using. So you can see that when I play up higher, that the filtering changes. And the particular patch I have is one that's set up for fifths. Totally cool. There's no patch on the SY-1000 that does that. This is all being done entirely inside of the computer. Now you could also create your own Reactor instrument that you wouldn't even need to have Digital Performer running, but I just wanted to show how we can combine these two things together. So that's a look at resynthesis, where we have access to the 6 string outputs from the SY-1000. And one thing I wanted to go ahead and mention real quick, that's another really great feature of this. Let's pop back to the signal path. If we look at the signal path inside of SY-1000, you'll notice that the divided pickup goes through the GK settings and then it gets recorded, then goes to the computer. And that's the case for all of these. You always see it's divided pickup, GK settings, and then into the computer. So if we look at the settings in the SY-1000, let's go back over here to System, and I'm going to go to my input settings. This means that these particular settings, in this case, I have the settings for my Dragonfly, that it goes through this level of processing before it gets recorded. And if I've set up my different guitars, this is relevant if you're using more than one guitar. You know, for each guitar, you're setting different string levels and different lengths. It could be different scales for it. But basically, the idea is that you've normalized the signals from these different guitars. So it really doesn't matter which guitar you've used. The track, when it's played back, it should sound the same independent of which guitar you've used to do the recording, which is kind of cool. So you could track it with one guitar, switch, make some punches using a different guitar, and if presuming that you're changing, as you should, your GK input settings each time you switch guitars, it really shouldn't matter which guitar you use for recording these settings. So I think that was really, really smart the way they routed that. So anyway, I hope this has given you some inspirations for some of the really cool things you can do with the SY-1000. I'm surprised there isn't more buzz about this, because this is probably one of the coolest features of the SY-1000. I wouldn't be surprised if someone's really serious about guitar synthesis, that maybe they would pick up an SY-1000 just because it's such a great interface, and that for the first time we've got a great guitar synthesizer married with the ability to, in the USB stream, get access to all these different parameters. Okay, I hope you found this video helpful, and check out some of my other videos. I do have another one on guitar synthesis using the SY-1000 and plugins.